Well, hello everybody at our campuses at Watkins, Glen, and Miracle Mile. Happy Mother's Day for those of you to whom that applies, and we mean by that all the ladies who we honor and respect so much in our church family. None of you are my mother, but I appreciate you very much, and I hope you feel very much honored and appreciated. Did you get your flower? If so, hold it up. Oh, I see that it goes with your outfit. Very nice. I'm glad you got. Hey, how come you got two flowers there, Fred? I don't know what you're doing there. We are in part 3 of a 4-part message series teaching about, the title is Your God is Able. Say that with me. Your God is able. And we've talked about how your God is able to keep you and to bless you. In this Mother's Day weekend, your God is able to use you. And I think particularly moms, how God has used you in the lives of your families, your husbands or your kids or your grandchildren. And this message 3, the primary verse that I'd like you to reflect on, memory verse, is 2 Chronicles 16:9. Would you read that with me? The eyes of the Lord search back and forth across the whole earth, looking for people whose hearts are perfect toward him, so that he can show his great power in helping them. And I read that verse, and what does it take to be used by God? For a couple of weeks in a row, I inflicted on you my singing. I'm not going to do it for 3 weeks in a row because I already thinned the crowd out probably by doing that. But what I would like you to, I included the words in your notes of a song that I learned as a baby Christian. I was a month or two old in the Lord, and this song was taught to me, and I think it goes back many decades before I ever heard it. But the words are these: to be used of God, to sing, to speak, to pray. To be used of God, to show someone the way. I long so much to feel the touch of his consuming fire. To be used of God is my desire. Do I get an amen? Is that your hope and prayer, that God will use you? Well, if that is true, what kind of person must you and I be to be used greatly by God? First of all, I must keep my life clean. Say that with me. Keep my life clean. 2 Timothy, I included chapter 2, verse 21. I'm going to read a verse just before that. Paul is saying to Timothy, and remember last week we talked about 2 Timothy being his last letter. Well, he says this to his much younger Timothy: in a large house there are many utensils, not only of gold and silver, but also of wood and clay. Some utensils are for special purposes and some for common use. But then he says in verse 21, if you keep yourself pure, you will be a utensil God can use for his purpose. Your life will be clean, and you'll be ready for the Master to use you for every good work. So it's important for us to keep our lives clean, to keep our utensils pure so that God can use us. And that refers to our personal lives, to our personal sins that we think nobody else knows about, perhaps, those secret sins, if you will. In this time of spring, do you ever, I notice, and maybe you notice, how the first thing to show signs of life, besides the crocuses or the tulips, are the weeds. Have you noticed that weeds seem to find their existence everywhere, in the little cracks and crannies in your driveway or your sidewalk? I have this personal thing. Now, it's hard for this old boy to get down to the ground, but once I get down there, I get a personal satisfaction out of pulling those weeds up. And I like it right after it rained. You know, you get a hold of them and you get the root and all. Because otherwise, if you just cut off the top part, if you just mow over them or you use the weed whacker or the Roundup or something like that, it doesn't have a lasting effect. But if you get it root and all, and that's a way that we keep our lives clean, is to help, with God's help, get after the root and all. And it's not just the surfacey, what people see, but it's the whole root system. And so we're called to ruthlessly deal with sin as it shows itself and to keep our lives clean. And that's a prerequisite for God to use us greatly for his service. Secondly, to keep my eyes open. Psalm 105:4, the psalmist says, keep your eyes open for God. Watch for his works. Be alert for signs of his presence. Um, Jesus taught in one of the Beatitudes, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." That overlaps with the previous point, doesn't it? Keep your lives clean and pure, and your eyes will be able to see what God is doing in your life. We like to think of vision as meaning, a grand scheme. We have God's vision or plan for my life. I believe that vision usually comes gradually. It's seeing God at work in your present situation and understanding what's the next step to move with God for that next step. And the vision gradually becomes more clear. We take a step into the darkness, and then we take a step after that. And then the vision opens up as we go. It's not unlike driving on a dark night with your headlights on your car. You see a few hundred feet maybe into the future, but you travel that distance, and then you see the next couple hundred feet. And isn't that the way life is? That we follow God, and we keep our eyes open, and we're watching for the next step as He unveils it, as He shows us. And often, though, we have this desire to take a shortcut, and we think we know what the vision is, and God, this is my vision. Bless what I'm doing. But realistically, we need to take the time to open our eyes and to ask God to learn to do what God is blessing. So it's not, God, bless what I'm doing, but to learn to do what God wants to bless. And that's how a vision takes form and shapes up before us. If you make up your own vision, you're already off course. So we have to be careful to discover God's vision, keeping our eyes open. The third aspect of being used by God is to keep my heart grateful. Paul gets at this in Romans 12:11, where he says, "Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord." Implied in that is a gratefulness, to appreciate what a privilege it is to serve Jesus. Last week we heard Robert and Celine talk about serving the Lord, and I loved it when Robert said, we were serving at the mall, but now we're serving at Watkins Glen, and that just naturally came out of his mouth, that serving is part of being a follower of Christ, isn't it? So to be grateful for that opportunity. Psalm 92, the first couple verses really get at this. It says, read it with me, would you? "It is a good thing to give thanks unto the Lord, and to sing praises to your name, O Most High, to show forth your loving kindness in the morning, and your faithfulness every night. It is a good thing to give thanks unto the Lord." When I was a new Christian, that also could have been a song. Be thankful that I chose not to sing those words to you. But to sing praises to your name, O Most High. Somebody wrote it wrong on the lyrics, almost high, ALMOST. And sometimes we forget that He is most high. It's not almost high. But it is a good thing to be grateful. God uses grateful people. Say that with me. God uses grateful people. Now look at your neighbor in the face and say that to them. God uses grateful people. That's the key to lasting in ministry, to usefulness over the long haul, is to maintain your gratitude. The attitude of gratitude is important to longevity in ministry. Otherwise, you just kind of burn out. The healthiest emotion of all, I would suggest, is thankfulness or gratitude. So keep my heart grateful is important. And then the fourth thing that's important to be used by God is to keep my purpose firm. One of my all-time favorite verses is where David is referring in Acts chapter 13, and he just is kind of in a passing comment. He refers to David is the king that had Israel at its highest point, and he was such a hero for the Jewish people. And he says this about David: David served God's purpose in his own generation. And by the way, the next line is, and then he died. Isn't that what we're called to do? To serve God's purpose in our generation. And then we're going to die. But to live as fully as we can. And we don't always know what impact that will have in the future. I say to the ladies, to the moms or the grandmas here today, you don't know. You're not always going to see what the impact is on that grandchild. Or maybe there's a great-grandchild that hasn't even been born yet. I got a little tiny glimpse, and this is kind of hokey, but forgive me. It's a not, at least it's not a McDonald's illustration, but it's an Aldi's illustration. Any of you shop at Aldi's? And you know how you pay your quarter and you get your cart. And I notice more and more there's a trend for people to just give their cart to somebody else. Well, I had to pay a quarter. Nobody was there to give me a cart. But when I was done with the cart, I wanted to hand it off, to somebody else. I thought, this would be cool. Who can I give my cart to? There was nobody to give it to. So I just left it there by the door, and I'm sure somebody used it. So I paid, paid it forward, if you will, not seeing who the recipient was. And then that struck me. Isn't that what we're called to do when we think about our giving? We don't always get to see the end from the beginning. We may not see who the recipient of our giving is, but we're still called to give. I was inspired this week by reading about a tree that's it's called a bristlecone tree. Did I get that right, Mark? And this is the longest living tree in the world, and it's in California. Basically, it's the high elevation mountains, about just below the tree line. The tree line is as high as possibly anything can live or survive. It's like 10,000, 11,000 feet altitude, way up there, and it's a very harsh environment. And it grows practically in stone. There's very little earth or soil to sustain it. But these trees have been found to live. And I think we have a picture to show you right now on the screen. To live up to 5,000 or more than 5,000 years. They can tell by doing a core sample carefully to tell how old the tree actually is. They can't simply cut one down and count the growth cycles, the circles because they don't even have some years they don't even produce any growth. But the wonderful, interesting thing about those trees that live so long is that it's a combination of dead wood and living wood all intertwined. And you can kind of see that. Somebody looked at that and said, what an ugly tree. Well, if you get up to be 5,000 years old, see how you look, But the strength of the tree is then it makes use of the dead part too. Still has gone before and still serves the function. It's all intertwined. It's dead, but still part of the tree. It becomes fused together. The living and the dead is fused together. And so despite the harsh, cold, frigid, short growing season up there, these trees have lived for that long. And somebody tried to plant them in a more friendly environment, and they didn't do well. They didn't live. They required that challenge. And why do I think of that? Because they have a purpose, and their purpose is found up there in the hard times, in the austere environment. As I'm speaking to you today, I'm aware of several deaths. Some of them you know of, some of them you probably haven't heard of yet. Some of them are elderly people in a nursing home, and it's just anticipated, Others have died with a long, lingering hospice kind of situation. But I just heard today about one where I got the phone call. I thought it was going to be about the dad who had lived a long life and was very ill. But surprisingly, it was his daughter who died. And they just discovered that she died a couple days ago. And so we don't know. We think we got it all figured out. But our purpose is to keep going and to realize that God's plan is not always our plan. I asked Mark, who puts this video together today, to have a picture here now of the ball diamond that we've looked at many times. And I lift this up to you because we're going to be having 101, 201, 301, and 401 coming up second Sunday of June. I think it's June 9th. And so just to give you that heads up. But we have these purposes that our first purpose is to please God. We are planned for God's pleasure. And that's represented by worship on the diamond that you're looking at. And then we're formed for God's family. That's fellowship. That's first base. 101 class. If you have not yet taken 101 class, we hope you can be with us. We are created to become like Christ. That's discipleship. 201, second base. We are shaped for service. That's 301. That's the third base that you see. And we are made for a mission. That's evangelism or mission. All of those things are our purpose. And so we serve God's purpose in our generation. And then we die. And then we pass it on to somebody else. The fifth important aspect of being used by God is that I keep my mind on Jesus. I need to, that expression, keep your head in the game. Jesus ultimately demonstrated that. And there's a verse here, Hebrews 12:2, that I hope you can reflect on, meditate on later on today even. It says this. Would you read it with me? Keep your eyes on Jesus, who both began and finished this race we're in. Study how he did it, because he never lost sight of where he was headed. He could put up with anything along the way, cross, shame, whatever. And that's the Message paraphrase. So we keep our eyes on Jesus, our mind on Jesus, and we allow him to use us. A different translation says, fix your eyes on Jesus. And when you fix your eyes on Jesus, he fixes your eyes and helps you to focus on him. So, we have that expression. I've used it many times that we're here to pass the baton on to the next generation. I'm not sure that's a good metaphor, because once you pass the baton, it's implying like your race is done. But as long as you have breath, maybe you pass the torch. And somebody else picks up the torch that you've carried, but you still have a role to play until God calls you home to be with Jesus. And so we're all in this kind of like that tree up on the highest elevation. Some of us are more dead than alive, but we're still part of it. And we all have a role to play. So mothers, daughters, granddaughters, men, we're all called to fulfill that calling and to be used of God. I would close with a question that I've asked many times before. Are you willing to give as much of yourself as you can to as much of God as you can understand? Amen.